back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. In our two-dimensional political conversation we tend to have in this country, people tend to think of the working class, for example, as exclusively white when there are enormous numbers of members of the working class who are black, brown, and so on. We also, I've noticed in our political conversation, tend to think of West Virginia as a quote unquote white state. Now, the people who make that mistake arguably might include some of West Virginia's own elected representatives. Along those lines, Senator Joe Manchin has been in the news a great deal lately, as you undoubtedly know. And I wanted to talk to my next guest about it because she wrote an article entitled, her cartoons were quoted and cited and linked in an article entitled Joe Manchin's Fixation on Republican Validation Ignores Black West Virginians. So without any further ado, let me welcome my guest. Crystal Dawn Good is an artist. She's affiliated with what is known as the Afro-Latchian movement, which is, obviously a conflation of African and Appalachian. So she's an artist. She's a social advocate. She also, as I said, writes, and her cartoons are collected, I believe, but she'll correct me if I'm wrong, in a Twitter account and elsewhere known as Black by God, the West Virginian. So without any further ado, Crystal Good, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And well, we're glad you made it. I guess, first of all, let me start with this. Anything you need to correct about my introduction of you?
No, I think you got a lot in there. I just one West Virginian with one story, just trying to share a little bit of where I'm from with folks. So I guess I'm just putting my own asterisk in there. I don't speak for everybody. I only speak for Crystal Good. So, yeah.
Well, we all should do that, I guess, more often. But Crystal, I guess, first of all, starting and talking about Black West Virginia. I mentioned in my introduction that we have this kind of two-dimensional, political thinking that categorizes West Virginia as a quote-unquote white state. I looked up before this segment, I looked up the official figures from 2019, say that something like 3.9% of West Virginians are black. I'm going to also guess, knowing how censuses work and undercount black people in this country, I'm going to guess the real number is probably significantly higher than that. So we need, theoretically, in a democracy, to have a government that represents all the citizens. And I guess I would start with this. I guess I'm kind of a leading question, but do you all have a set of political leaders that represent all of you, including Black West Virginians?
Well, I think I like to start, that 3% in West Virginia, to put it in, numbers, right, is about 65,000 people, right? So 65,000 people is, probably, it's the size of a small town, and that's the community that's scattered across West Virginia. But but it's also a very powerful political voting bloc inside of a state with, population of, what is it, like 1 point something million people. It's a small, it's a very small state, right? So I think what's interesting is kind of inside West Virginia, right? How politics move. And it's not, as you said, sort of in this two-party system or this two-dimensional way. We got multi-dimensions going on. Yeah. And, I think, I like to sort of, whatever the conversation is in the world right now in terms of what a Joe Manchin Democrat is, and how that is, Joe Manchin is not a Democrat. He's a Republican. We've heard this over and over. We're hearing this in the national narrative, but, Very rarely are people looking back at what's actually going on in West Virginia and the political climate there. And so, thanks for having me on today, because I think this is quite a moment to talk about politics in West Virginia, and to talk about the Black vote in West Virginia, and to talk about democracy in America.
So, well, let's start with then the controversy around Joe Manchin and the issue of voting rights. Your cartoon, which was quoted in the art, not quoted, that's not the right word, but displayed in the article that I mentioned, as from blackbygod.org, and it basically shows Mitch McConnell at the top of a cliff, and your senator holding down with his foot black voters trying to get up to the top of a hill, or that cliff, and the ghost of Robert Byrd, former senator there, saying, "Don't make the same racist mistakes I did, Joe." So I would say your point of view is pretty clearly laid out there. It suggests that Joe Manchin, in blocking the voting rights bill now before the Senate, is, well, he's suppressing black voters. And that basically, I take your cartoon to put him in a long and not at all distinguished tradition of West Virginia and other white politicians suppressing black voting rights. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to find the reference for the article, because the article was written by Noah Chonga, and she referenced the cartoon, and she also referenced several other sort of leaders and activists in West Virginia in that. So she's a fluent writer, and she's cranking out articles. And I wish I could tell you which one that the cartoon was cited in, because I think that's important to give that credit to Noah.
Let me just. It's headline is, it's a news one. Joe Manchin's fixation on Republican validation ignores black West Virginians is the headline.
Yeah, and I think that she lays it out clear in her article, and then since then, even today, articles are coming out about Black West Virginians speaking out and saying that you won't have you can't depend on the Black vote to vote for a Joe Manchin Democrat. I think that's the best way to frame it. So it's quite a moment in terms of political turmoil, which, kind of in interesting turns and tides of West Virginia history, when you talk about a state that seceded during the Civil War, and, just the political climate of West Virginia since its very beginning. I always think that if you look at West Virginia being sort of a canary in the coal mine of American politics, you will see, how things play out in the larger narrative. But that's part of the challenge, is getting a chance to share and to kind of go deep into the nuance of what, a Joe Manchin conversation opens up in terms of the ghost of Robert C. Byrd, which is what we're all living in. We are all in the shadow of the racism of the filibuster, right? I mean, and these things happen to center in West Virginia. With Robert C. Byrd's history with the filibuster, and then Joe Manchin literally stepping into those shoes and carrying out that that mission of racism. It's like it's almost become a mission. Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting, Crystal Good, because first of all, I mean, I'm sure Robert Byrd did some good things in his life too. I can tell you, as a musician, he wasn't much of a fiddle player either. But the filibuster it all seems to fit together in an all too familiar pattern when you think about it, right? Because you've got Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, opposing this voting bill, and he's proposing a kind of lesser, alternative, so standing in the way of a comprehensive approach to expanding voting rights. And at the same time, he's fighting tooth and nail for the filibuster, which is the preservation of minority rule, undemocratic rule, in an undemocratic institution, the United States Senate, that is itself a relic of slavery. So it seems to me West Virginia may be, in terms of population, a small state, but it seems to me you're fighting some very ancient and very big battles there.
Yes. I mean, yeah, and if you look at the controversy that's going on inside West Virginia with the head of the Democratic Party, Belinda Viafor, on a Zoom call, there's plenty of content out there where West Virginia Democratic Party, I believe it is 48 years past the mandate, is now implementing affirmative action policies. So when you talk about West Virginia being in a relic of time, right? The fact that it is 2020 and the West Virginia Democratic Party is just now following bylaws and all of this language in order to implement affirmative action policies. And, you know, the way that they did this, the way that they pushed the button to fast forward time was to create for the party leadership, which is also Joe Manchin's cousin, Belinda Viafor, the head of the Democratic West Virginia Party. You know, they rushed through an affirmative action plan, which didn't have any input from anybody that would be on an affirmative action committee. And it's on Zoom. And, you know, I just kind of, that's one of the gifts of COVID, that we were able to sort of witness that, you know, and for it to be documented, as so many things require in this America, that you have to see it on film, right, in order to believe it. Right. That for the 46 years that Black West Virginians have been saying and trying to hold the West Virginia Democratic Party accountable, right? So now we're at a point in time where the West Virginia Democrats are just getting the memo that it's time for affirmative action, right? So the filibuster is is a conversation that really holds the values, right, of this relic of this the slave institution, the whole system, right? And what's so interesting is that, you know, we're still actually debating in some ways, you know, this reality, and still trying to look for something that's, softer or easier to understand. And it's not, it's right in your face. And if you can look at West Virginia and you can look at what happened in Kentucky, you know what I mean? And you're looking what happens in America, where Black people exist. And I think that's the thing that I would maybe, when you asked about the introduction, you know, maybe offer a bit of a correction in terms of, like, you know, people that think, Black people don't exist. Well, Black people don't think that when they exist in a community that's not, that's not quote unquote this, yeah. And so I think it's always, one of the things about, representation is representing everybody. Right. And so I think that right now, people that will listen to and inquire and get curious about what's going on in West Virginia and what the Black community has to say, because let me tell you, when people think about Black West Virginia, they don't think about the history. They don't think about Carter G. Woodson. They don't think about Booker T. Washington. Right. They don't think about T.D. Jakes. They don't think about Bill Withers. They don't think about Katherine Johnson. They're not connecting, right? Dare I say, the absolute greatness that comes out of Black West Virginia for this country, and I say that very proudly, knowing that we're at a political pivotal moment. And I'm excited to see, other folks recognize that, hey, we need a little bit of help, but we got a lot to offer the narrative. And I think this is quite a moment in time, and I'm excited. I'm really excited. I really am.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, and I want to talk a little bit more about that, Crystal Good. But, just to be clear, by the way, I was talking about the way the kind of political pundits in the media present to the country the reality of the situation and how they erase certain populations sometimes in doing that, and certain aspects of history. I mean, you just listed a whole bunch of people, some of whom I had no idea were from West Virginia. Bill Withers. I didn't know he was from West Virginia, T.D. Jakes, whomever. But also in terms of history, people who know their Union history know that the mine workers that organized in West Virginia were, if I recall correctly, the first multiracial labor organization and labor action group in American history. And, that gets erased too. So it looks like you were about to say something.
Well, I was tickled me because, when I offered poetry readings, once I was introduced as a proud Appalachian redneck. And, the crowd sort of giggled, I think, just trying to connect, the idea of what is, why would Black people claim an identity as a redneck, right? And I have this beautiful history that I can unpack and start to share about the redneck miners, but also even in those stories, right? In those stories, and this is a very important moment also because it's the 100-year anniversary of the 1921 Blair Mountain March. And inside that, we like to look at the unity, right? The story is always celebrated. It becomes very glamorous when you talk about the unity of people. Of course, you've got Black folks, black coal miners, immigrant coal miners, from Hungary, all of the Eastern European, coming in, and then you've got the Appalachian natives, and that we're fighting together against the coal company. But 100 years then and 100 years now, you need to put yourself in the frame of a coal camp that was very caste system, right? And so
good point.
the black miners were at the end of the caste system, and that meant, closer to the worst amenities, so I think we have a romanticized vision of what the 1920s mine wars were like. And I think that the community and the climate that I live in 2021, which is supposed to be, 100 years past this, struggling in these conversations, right? It's like, there's such a fear, I think, of Black folks just having a seat at the table. Hollis, there's an article. I'm doing this little print newspaper in West Virginia. My first edition is coming out. Every time I open up my email, somebody is sending me an article. It's a very beautiful thing where people are wanting to express themselves, in terms of having a platform, which is something that's missing. People need a space to talk, to have their narratives shared, But Hollis wrote this beautiful essay. It just came in, it's like, what's the point of demanding a seat at the table if they're just going to eat you when you get there? That's what it feels like in terms of I think, he expressed it of, the conflict. So if we're in 1921, if we're in the 1921s, then what's happening is that, we know who the enemy is, right? But, things become easier for other people, which is, I don't know how to explain it. No, I love Mine Wars history. We won't go there. But you opened up a really great analogy between about what West Virginia and, what we have to offer. And I really wish that this is a moment in time too, for us to recognize the class system. And I really prefer the caste system, because that's it.
So before we go on, my mind just kind of latched on to what you said about being a Black redneck. And I'm trying to remember the history. I mean, I know a lot of people think redneck is comes from some big white guy, gets a sunburn, and that's where the term on his neck, and that's where the term comes from. But if I recall, it has something to do with wearing a red scarf or a bandana that had to do with whether it was miners' strike or something else. You probably remember, right?
Oh yeah,
you must remember. Yeah,
it's an important. I have several. I could go grab a red bandana right now. At least keep one, handy, so that I love to tell the story, of the miners, of the redneck miners. I mean, 1920. You remember the coal company paid the miners in scrip. So, and then you had to go to the company store and buy all of your essentials to work for the company, right? Whether that was your pick or your hard hat or, your supplies. And the company only supplied red bandanas that was the color, they're buying it in bulk. That's the only thing you can buy is a red bandana as your bandana. You need a little hanky when you're working. And but the coal company also selected the red because if it was to get bloody, if someone was to cough up blood or to be sick or something, the red was not as shocking as coming out of as white bandanas. At least that's how the story's told. And so what happened was the miners decided to use these bandanas as a sign of solidarity, of union, togetherness, because, company town, company store, you can't just walk around saying on your T-shirt pro-union, So the red neck around the miner's neck with the red bandanas became a term of pride, a term that means solidarity. However, it's a very difficult transition for folks, and I don't think that you're going to see a political movement rallied around the term redneck. But it certainly embodies, I think, that the movement that America needs now, which is solidarity across class, and those quote unquote have-nots.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. The only political movement I can think of that rallies around that name is Redneck Revolt, if you've run across
Yeah.
those folks. I kind of put them in the same mental slot. Maybe this isn't fair. And I appreciate all of them, but with like the Socialist Rifle Association, another group that, kind of trying to reclaim negative tropes about certain populations as well. But, I wanted to talk to you about something else having to do with perceptions of West Virginia, too, which is an op-ed that you wrote a couple months ago in the Charleston Gazette Mail. The headline, we don't always pick our own headlines, but the headline is "Stigma Against Black West Virginians Must End." And it's really about substance use disorder. As you point out, there's been a lot of coverage of the opioid crisis among white rural Americans, but there's been a steeper rise in opioid deaths among black people, 43% over the past 5 years, compared to their white counterparts. So West Virginians, white and black, have an addiction problem, and it seems to me that what you're reflecting here, but you tell me, of course, is that unlike other people who suffer from addiction disorder, Black West Virginians have to face a certain level of condemnation that perhaps their white counterparts do not. Is that accurate?
Well, I think it's going to I'm opening up the conversation around, access to recovery and the way that, the hoops and the challenges for anybody to access recovery, right? And quality recovery. And because there's quite an influx of cash flow to West Virginia to solve the problem of recovery. And, some of the treatment centers and facilities, even though they're government funded or whatever. I mean, you just really question, is this sort of part of a machine of a mechanics of, government, I don't know if that's really, helping people, or we're just kind of creating another sort of recovery system that's not jail, and people aren't really getting amenities in there and true recovery. I feel very fortunate that, as they say, I got the gift of desperation. And once I got the gift of desperation, I really threw my whole self into recovery through meetings and, a therapist, and, not drinking and not using. And, it changed my life. So when you said that we would talk about this, boy, I tell you, I felt a piece of relief moving from a political conversation in West Virginia to a recovery conversation, because to have a recovery conversation, I have to center myself back in my recovery,
Right.
that we can't help anybody if we're not helping ourselves. And I know that my journey through recovery in West Virginia, and I'm not alone in this. There's so much racism inside a recovery movement that
Right.
was, I think something which was one of those things that, as growing up in West Virginia, that you just kind of like move through. Like the end game was more important than like dealing with this. But now that I'm on this other side of my recovery, you know what I mean? I'm not in that, phase of like, just in that shell shocked space of like getting your life together, and can look back and say, boy, that was pretty terrible. Like, that's not how it works, right? Like, it's not how it works. It doesn't work. It doesn't have to work. Like, your sponsor shouldn't be saying the N word. And this is a common things like, and I'm slowly kind of talking to people that want to talk to me through recovery, and, that have had experiences of like, just, having to latch on and deal with shit, even though it's blatantly, racist. And the thing is, even inside that, it's sort of like I'm really trying to understand how the systems move, like with drug court and who gets assigned that and who gets assigned this. And, it really just seems like a place that I want to keep looking at and figuring out ways to, on the simplest form, making myself visible as a person that is in recovery and recognizes that, hey, if you're a non-white person and you don't find yourselves in a recovery space, at least I'm here. And I think that's important. Plus, I'm in recovery. So it's great if people also want to make themselves seen to me, because
Right.
that's more helpful. And that's one of the things that I noticed when I started doing that, there was a lot of folks in recovery, but they just didn't actually participate in the community, because now people can go online and people can do different things to find themselves. So for me, I just want to bring the question back to really trying to help educate the people that what recovery is and trauma, and really having a mental health conversation. And I hope that I can be a catalyst for that by just, saying, that hey, my name's Crystal and I'm an alcoholic, that's.
It's interesting because I'm in recovery too, and have been for a while. And obviously, I'm not black, but I've seen a lot in and out of the rooms of. There's recovery, and then there are the human beings who participate in the recovery process. And we all know that human beings are flawed creatures by nature. And I've also heard a lot. And by the way, I've also had people, very close family members, die of this disease, and I've had to live with that pain too. This is one of the first things people said to me when I came around recovery was, get a black suit. You're going to be going to some funerals, and that is part of what I'd never thought it would be so close to me, but that is part of what we deal with too, and to deal with all the pain of that and the struggle of that, and also deal with racism, to me is just unforgivable as a reflection of where we are as a society. I also hear a lot of women talk about the sexism they face as well.
13th, the 13th.
Oh yeah, the famed 13th step is one of them, where men will prey on vulnerable women who come into the program, and but also, even, let's face it, that if you read a lot of the old literature of 12 step, there's a lot, there's a chapter in the big book entitled "To Wives." It's like,
Oh yeah,
Todd,
even if you can, but everybody got through that chapter to get to where they are today, right? Like anybody in recovery today at this moment said, okay, F that chapter, I'm going to keep moving in this program, right? Like everybody did it, right? And that's sort of like same thing that I think is happening on even on the political side, right? Like we just got to get through this stuff so that we can get over here. But no, we need to change that, right? Like it's ridiculous, right? This is ridiculous. And so for me, what COVID did for my recovery did open me up to an online space, right? Where I could go into recovery spaces with Black women, with Black queer women, with international communities, and we could talk about experiences that we had in the room, and not feel like, really be validated in that space, because it does have an impact on your recovery if you can't kind of be there and not be met and understood. And that's why we have recovery spaces for men and for women, and all these different
right, for sure, yeah. And it's funny, this is a personal aside, Crystal, but I haven't been able to connect to online meetings. It's maybe it's because when I came in, it was kind of an old school situation where, like, I remembered all the meetings I went to. They're the same three. I thought of them as old ladies then, but are probably younger than I am now. But they were always like, you could smoke in meetings, you could drink, coffee, you could eat brownies, and they were always like, have another brownie, have another cigarette, can I light it for you? And I've long since quit cigarettes and brownies, by the way. But I guess there's something, this is just me, but I love the fact that there's that diversity available now to people that there wasn't. The only thing that I can remember about all the meetings I've gone to, wherever I've lived, is I've always wanted to go where people are dealing with real issues. I was in recovery in Los Angeles for a while, and basically it's actors looking to find their next agent. I mean, it's as opposed to like getting real about what's going on. And I think to me, and then maybe, I'll give you the last words, but it seems to me that the common thread, whether you're talking about recovery or politics, that the common threads, besides the fact that they both reflect the flaws in our society, right? And is that with both of them, the only way to navigate it for me is to stay focused on the higher purpose and the spiritual purpose, however you define that, and not get lost in the, you know, and not put your faith in people who will disappoint you, not put your, understand you'll meet obstacles and unhelpful people, and keep your eyes on where you're going. That's
Yeah.
my closing thought. What about you?
Well, I just want to thank you for recentering me in my recovery, right? Like, I mean, like, trust me, my day and these past couple of days, this Joe Manchin conversation, I'm trying to print a newspaper, I'm trying to do this, I'm fired up, I'm pissed off, I'm this, I'm that. That's probably, I'm not, I'm, yeah, but a higher power, a higher purpose, right? Living your life so that you don't have to make so many amends, and it's like,
Exactly.
Jesus, Joe Manchin, can you believe the amends that I just don't understand? They call West Virginia almost heaven. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a kind of a sad framing, because almost is kind of like never there. And that's one thing that's interesting
Yeah.
about recovery is, you know what I mean? It's like, once you're in it, you know what the other side is. It's a very clear distinction between the two. And that's sort of like not to frame recovery in right or wrong, because everybody is in different journeys and places, but I know that the way that I live today is the right, and the way that I was learning coping skills or whatever, that narrative that I constantly need to be unpacking, and the truthfulness of today, is is such a more peaceful, more centered way. And so I thank you so much for recentering me in that and reminding me of my own words of what I'm writing, because, I think, I write about recovery, and that was a place to make myself visible. One of the things that's happening in West Virginia, and I'll just close with saying that we're having an HIV epidemic. We're having an HIV epidemic that scares the CDC, right? So not only do we have Joe Manchin, we have an HIV epidemic, we have poverty, we have all these things. But, the problem is that, people are so cruel to people that are addicted, right? And so the needle
Yeah, for
exchange and the
sure.
harm reduction, and we're not making recovery, we're not taking the stigma out of recovery, right? And so, you showing yourself to me, thank you. You know what I mean? And, I think this is part of the conversation. Black people are on drugs, white people are on drugs, poor people, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't discriminate, and so the arrogance of what's happening, I think, in around West Virginia, the conversation in recovery is something that needs, people to keep coming out and sharing their stories and showing compassion, because it's human beings. And I'm so thankful that someone took the time to write a book, right, and to keep a meeting,
Yep.
and to keep doing those things, and I hope I can keep giving back. And the best thing about it is, it's a community that I know is there and that is there today. And I think I might need to get myself to a meeting now.
Yeah, well, you and me both. And by the way, for anybody, I know there are always people who want to say on social media when they watch something like this or hear something like this, oh, well, anonymity at the level of press,
I know,
radio, and
I
films
know,
is, but you and I, neither one of us
I know.
mentioned a specific program.
You did good.
So don't give us, all you commenters out there, don't you give us a hard time, because we're only trying to do a little good here in this world. So crystal good. Thank you so much for your cartoons and your work. Thank you for your commentary. People can find your work where Black by God at .org. Is that
Yep.
it?
Blackbygod.org. Yes.
I love it. And thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.